Hello, everyone out there, running fans, track fans, throwing, jumping, overall athletic fans. Welcome to the Talking in Ovals podcast. Thank you so much for being here on this Monday, October 3rd of 2022. Before we get into anything fun, give us a like, share, follow, subscribe, rate us 5 stars on Spotify and iTunes, spread this word of mouth. And unfortunately, I have some sad news for the astute listeners. Dave is not able to be with us. Coach Hyatt, he had something pop up, so he told me that he wasn't going to be able to be here. But fortunately, I'm used to doing this type of stuff. I've interviewed a lot of people before, so I'm pretty good to hold down shop. And I think today is going to be a show that everyone that likes the sport of running, that's ever coached before, is going to really love. I am happy to have with me Jonathan J. Marcus. He's an overall coach and the co-host of On Coaching Podcast. So if you get the hint there, he likes to coach. How's it going, Jonathan?
Doing awesome. Now I heard that badass intro. Jeez, I got to tell Magnus, we got up our game. That is the most kick-ass intro I've ever heard. Kudos on that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it so much. So yeah, we're going to have a good time here because I've coached before, which I mentioned on the podcast. Hyatt has talked about coaching before. We actually had one of our former athletes on last week's show, Janae Valman. So please go back and give that a listen. But we eat, sleep, and breathe the sport. We love coaching. Funny enough, Jonathan, I just got a random phone call today from one of my former athletes that I coached over at Marist College. Right now, he's, married another one of my athletes from Marist, has a few kids down in Florida. And you could probably attest to this. We just talked. We talked nothing about running. We just talked and saw how everything was. And I think that's one of the biggest perks of being a coach outside seeing the athlete's success, especially when it comes to running or kind of these individual grueling sports, just the relationships you build with the athletes. So before we get into any of the real coaching grind, what do you say about that? Just kind of the relationship building and how many athletes do you now just keep in touch with just because?
Oh, I mean, a good amount. I view coaches as kind of like mentors, or, if you're a Lord of the Rings nerd, you're basically Gandalf to the hobbits. And it doesn't matter what age you intersect with that athlete, whether they're on the beginning of their development pathway in athletics or towards the end of that trajectory. You're there to point them in the right direction. And that's fundamentally, first and foremost, that's the job. Just giving them good orientation, good sound guidance and advice, but ultimately laying either the foundation or giving them the opportunity to spread their wings and fly and be independent. And that's the most beautiful thing, is to see athletes grow up, mature, maybe step away from the competitive side of the sport, but still play the sport because they have a love of the play, of the passion for it, not necessarily because they're out there trying to play to win anymore. And yeah, I mean, can't tell you how many times I just intersect with former athletes years later and talk nothing of running, but just catch up on life, and just warms my heart to see the beautiful people they become.
It's kind of the beauty of it. So, you spoke about, the love of the sport, the passion of the sport. Now, in order to be a coach, I feel like sometimes even more than an athlete, you really have to have a passion for that sport. Because, especially if most coaches of runners are former runners and they ran at a pretty high level. So it's kind of first the gut punch of, I'm not them anymore, but now I can at least try and pass on what I tried to do better and kind of get them there. So we all have our own coaching philosophy. There is some coaches that are much harder. There are some coaches that are a lot lighter, that like long distance, less distance, that push the envelope a little more in terms of what's legal, what's not legal. So everyone's different. I want you to kind of break down, what is your kind of general overall coaching philosophy when you're just getting athlete A that you honestly don't know much about yet, maybe outside of looking at some results, maybe talking to a former coach or a parent or something like that. What's your overall coaching philosophy when it comes to dealing with an athlete?
I mean, first and foremost, I try to calibrate, what game are we playing? I mentioned it before, you can play the game to play the game for the love of the play, or you can play the game and you're playing to win. So either you're playing to play or you're playing to win. And then sometimes you get that funner section where you're playing to play and playing to win concurrently. And that's really, really a lot of fun. So again, it's all contextualized based off what the athlete is wanting and where they're at in their journey. So a good example of this is I worked for many years with the national record holder for Mexico in the 1 mile, Daniel Herrera. And when I was working with him, he was an elite national caliber athlete, and he was playing a game to win. Like, he's concerned about making money, winning races, gaining times, advancing. That was the orientation. That's what preparation, that's what all dialogue and conversation center around. He recently got into Harvard grad school, been taking a break for last year. And now he's kind of like, doing some workouts and just texting me the workouts he's doing for fun.
Yeah.
And, I'm like, all right, just make sure you have an appetite, have fun with it. And then, I'm like, all right, well, at first I'm like, you plan to play or you plan to win? He goes, well, plan to play. I'll keep having fun. And then he hits me with a text of like, boom, 147, whatever, indoor record for Mexico in the 800. He says, I think I'm hungry. I go, oh, so now we're playing to win. So it changes the context of the relationship based once you establish what the ground rules are or the orientation of the athlete is. A lot of times there's this mismatch that happens where the coach might be playing to win, but the athlete's playing to play, or vice versa. And that's where friction happens. So I try to avoid that by like clearly orienting myself and the athlete support team, whether it be parents, family, friends, what have you, into that context of what are we doing? And then from there, that's the direction we go and, develop the relationship through.
Have you ever found yourself when you're coaching an athlete and, maybe they come in and they say, Coach Marcus, I'm here to work. I want to get better. I want to win. I want to be the best wherever I am, in my college, in my high school, in the pros. And then all of a sudden something switches off as you're doing that hard training, that maybe they realize maybe this is a little more than they can handle. And it's something that's hard for athletes to realize. Have you kind of seen when that switch occurs? Because I think sometimes the athletes can't see it and coaches can. And also, have you gotten yourself in that situation where you kind of find yourself, coaching a little bit harder to try and get them there, but then it's not happening? Like, have you been in those situations?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, but my, default is to be blunt, transparent, and honest to a fault. So I just remind the athlete the orientation and calibration and saying, hey, you are, drifting off course here. And I can't make the decision. Like I can only lead you to water, can't make you drink. But it's keeping that sharp, standard about why we're here. And I think, a lot of times what ends up happening, especially now more than ever, is we live in what I call fantasy land, where we've been sold these manufactured fairy tale narratives from forever and early on and continually bombard with them. And we forget that hard things are hard because they're hard. Yeah, and we forget this all the time. It's just reminding ourselves, like, there's a reason not a lot of people are doing this.
Yep.
There's a reason there's not this line of people out the door running this time, coming to this race in this championship, ready, rock and rolling to go. There's a reason, because it's really freaking hard. And that's okay. That's how we actually learn the most of ourselves, is through doing hard things. But unfortunately, by digesting all those fairy tales and fantasy narratives, we end up, what I've seen is we set our horizons often very low. And so in a lot of ways, the coach is a vehicle, if you will, and a source to help elevate someone's gaze on the horizon just a little higher towards the peak, rather than like keeping that head down, towards the valley.
Yeah, you would have really liked my coaches over at Marist College, Pete Colizzo and Chuck Williams, because they were very similar. They were dealing with grown men and women in college, and they were not going to sugarcoat it. If things weren't going the way that they were supposed to go, they'd be saying, hey, you're off course here. You know where you need to be. We talked about your plans this year. You're not hitting them right now, and we need to get you there. And when I coached over at Marist, I coached under Coach Colizzo for 2 years, paid 2 years volunteer. And one of the things I used to tell my athletes, I was more involved of the sprints and a little bit of long sprints. And I would say to them, Marist College, we're a small school. We're not producing a lot of national champions or even nationally competitive individuals, maybe regionally, but we have pride in what we do. But I would tell all my sprinters, and I don't know if you had the same mentality, if you're not here in college, to win a national championship as a Division One runner, if that's not your goal, then you're kind of wasting your time a little bit here, because I want to train you to become a national champion. Is that feasible for a lot of you? Maybe not. But if you're not trying to train that way in Division One, then what are you kind of doing? And I think it kind of goes back to your philosophy. Are you here to say you're a Division One athlete, or are you here to compete like a Division One athlete type of deal? So, I don't know if you kind of walk in that same mindset of, if you're telling me you're hungry and you're here to go, then we got to reach and train for your goal the whole entire time.
Yeah, Alex, I really appreciate that mindset. I'm a West Coast guy who went to an East Coast school because I loved the East Coast mentality. So different from the West Coast, like much more hard nosed, nose to the grindstone, like forget about it. We're going to do this thing. You knew where you stood with East Coast people. West Coast people, So, but when it comes to winning, I think that's the great misunderstood point is the thing I love about track and field and athletics, or individualized sports that have a collective team point or can have a collective team point total, is there is, yes, an absolute victor of the contest for sure. And that is something everyone should and can aspire to, but it's not something that everyone can and should actually grasp, because it takes a lot to get to the top. Yeah. It's only at the top for a reason. And what track and field and running lends itself to is a lot of victories in the same race. And when I say play to win, it doesn't necessarily mean like, hit the peak, let's get to Mount Everest. For some athletes, it's like, let's just get to base camp. Yep. Because where you're starting off is you're a walk-on freshman who, you can't tell your nose from a hole in the ground walking backwards. And if we can get you to be a all conference athlete by the time you're a senior, huge victory, huge. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we have to remember is there's always micro races within the macro race. And that's where, as coaches, I think we have to elevate athletes to always look towards achieving something that we see is capable and within them, that they have the potential to, and maybe they don't yet understand they're capable of, but helping them ascend to that peak for them.
It's almost like, what's more exciting as a coach? Watching that athlete break that PR in a milestone time, like your 5K guy going for sub 15 for the first time, or watching that really fast athlete win the conference in a more, not their best time, but an extremely tactical race and having success in your game plan. Like, I don't know what's almost more exciting there, because I feel like like you said, in the world of running, the winner isn't the only winner. There is a ton of winners throughout that race. And so it's such an interesting sport in that sense. And I want to ask you a little something. Me and Coach Hyatt over here, we always rag on the track and field meet coverage when it comes to like NBC and things like that. Now, we've loved what they've done with the Diamond League on Peacock, where they give you the world feed and you get to kind of just see the meet as the meet. But then when they put it on NBC, they put all these fluff pieces. They put all these background stories. You don't really watch the 5Ks. You don't really see the field events outside of a few jumps and stuff here. Is that kind of adding to this fantasy land that you kind of talked about with some of our athletes, where if they're not seeking the Peacock feed and they're not watching the world feed, they're not watching all of our other amazing athletes there, that they're kind of only being fed your Sydney McLaughlin, you're a Thing Mo, you're, Noah Lyles. And, it's great to highlight those athletes and it's great to aspire to be them. But I think there's some value in seeing, another athlete from another country getting a national record in a race where they got fifth. It's like something beautiful there. So do you think kind of the coverage of track and field, specifically in America, kind of lends itself to that fantasy world that we're seeing right now?
It's definitely noise, I would say, rather than signal, right? But it does send a message. It sends a message. It says, this is what we're going to pay attention to. We have these multi-million-dollar operation here. We're going to focus on this because we feel this is our best return on investment for the audience that we are trying to cater to. I think those large national broadcasts are designed to initially attract the non-track and field fan to track and field. So that's why you see the fluff puff pieces or the, only highlighting the big dogs who are running, absolute world-class times or records. And the key is the funnel. right? So once you've been attracted into the sport, well, where's the next step to become a little bit more quote unquote hardcore? But it doesn't exist really unless you kind of navigate through this really awkward stream of
You have to find them.
pay-per-view clicks. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's super, super tough. So it's like I've always thought about this as myself as a coach. It's like I could probably make a lot more dollars just writing generic programming for your average fluff intro runner who just wants some kind of direction.
Mm-hmm.
But, I like I said, I keep a sharp standard. I'm like, no, I'm here for really two things. Like when you talked about what was more exciting, someone, winning a meet, a conference meet title, or someone setting a PR, it's like, well, for me, there's two things that are really exciting. I try to really get those turning points, develop an athlete through the crucible of training, and then magnified through the crucible and education process that's racing. And the first one, again, part of my French, is giving a fuck. Like if I see that and you give an F, like that's awesome. Like you're coming down the home stretch, someone passed you, and you had to dig as deep as possible, and you just gave an F and you went for it. And maybe you didn't actually beat and outkick that person who passed you, or maybe you passed them back and they passed you back and what have you, but you showed some spunk. You gave an F. And then closely correlated with that was not punking out. Don't punk out. Like Mike Smith is a good friend of mine. He has a no punk out rule that I have stolen, and it's because it's just great verbiage around it. It's like so often we punk out when it gets hard. So often we punk out when the tribulations are there. You got an injury. Oh, I'm just not going to come to practice for like 6 weeks because I'm injured. It's like that's the most important time to come to practice and stay connected emotionally with your peers. Or I'm not going to do the little things, and they add up to big results like sleep and adequate, hydration, and keep my nutrition on point. And so all these things I'm constantly assessing, because if you give an F and you don't punk out, then that creates more excitement in me as a coach to then want to work with you. But again, as far as like how we attract globally fans in the sport, it is about telling stories. It has to be, because we are hardwired for narratives, but it's also making sure we have avenues for the more in-depth niche narratives rather than just the big front page narratives.
Yeah. And so a lot of people in the sport, obviously. Find somebody with a big pocket for me, and we need to start handing out contracts to some of these talented athletes. If we want to keep people in, me and Coach Hyatt talk about the ATL often, what they're trying to do with the American Track League, and we think it's a good idea. ESPN has been airing the meets, but it's kind of every other league that we found. That I'm a broken record if you listen to this podcast, so I'm sorry for saying it again, but every other league that we find, they can promote their athletes because who's going to be there. The PGA, even the LIV right now, it's an individual sport. Who's going to be at these events. They promote them. They're contracted essentially to them. UFC, big time. Who's going to be in that octagon. They tell you for a month away. We have no idea essentially who's going to be at these meets. There's talented individuals that are racing in the ATL. Yes, they're not your big time elite world champions, but they're running really fast, world-class caliber times. But there's no promotion. No one knows who's going to be there. There isn't a little kid that's clamoring to turn this on ESPN because their favorite runner's there. There is no such thing outside of the big names. So I love what they're doing, but if you know anybody with the deep pocket in the sport, tell them how many runners do you know if they said, we'll pay you $75K to show up at these 6 meets? I'm telling you, there's a lot of runners that'll be like, yes, I will do it for like 100,000. Just give me 6 meets, 100,000. That's all I have to do. Train for these 6 so my name could be on a promo. I'm in. Like, it doesn't even have to be the millions of dollars. But if America latches onto track and field, this is a huge group that can make a ton of money. And I think we need some rich people to notice that, to get these people on the maps.
Yeah, I mean, promotion is definitely asked backwards in America for the sport. We have a very amateurish mindset still about the infrastructure of meets and how we run it. And I mean, there's very simple examples we could take, even like the regional wrestling circuit that existed in the 60s and 70s, before WWF like bought them all out and, kind of like pigeonholed the market. Yeah. But again, it really comes down to, and I myself have been a meet director for a lot of these boutique meets, that have started up, like, the Sunset Tour. Jesse and I were the original founders and collaborators of it. I ended up not following through with it just because I was kind of burnt out after having put on all these other meets. And he was just like licking his chops. So he's ran with it and done a lot of good stuff, which is exciting to see. But at the end of the day, you need a little bit more hands on deck because you need someone to orchestrate behind the scenes and set the thing up, which is often what the job of a meet director is. Yeah. And then you also need the promoter, the person who goes out, shakes the hands, passes out the tickets, rings the doorbells, gets the ads, puts the flyers up, radio, spots, etc. And oftentimes what ends up happening is these are skeleton crews who are pulling off these like kind of world-class meets, even within the US. And that's just one line item that kind of gets forgotten because there's so many different, I could tell you story after story. We could take out like 2 days of a podcast here.
We'll have you on again. We could just talk about horror stories of running a meet.
Oh my gosh. Last second fires and worries and spending 8 hours to try to find a 10K female rabbit for Shalane Flanagan because all of a sudden she decides she want to go run. And it's like, well, F word, Shalane, there's not that many women who can run 5K at your 10K pace out there who are just hanging out. So
wait, is there nobody on your team available? Oh, they're all racing for PRs as well. Well, you're kind of
exactly. So, but those are the realities behind the scenes that no one sees. Yeah. But yeah, we definitely have a fundamental lack of professionalism and what it means to be professional. And yeah, Paul is doing a great job, with the ATL. It's phenomenal. Yeah. But again, he's a skeleton crew. He's a skeleton operator. So it's amazing what Doyle's been able to accomplish, just on his own and with his connections and, with a couple ancillary bodies and passionate volunteers helping him.
So yeah, if you're anybody out there, running fan, if you hear the ATLs coming into your area, please. And if you have any experience in the, meet area, please go help out. Let's make this bigger. And if you are going there, tell them you want to help promote it as well. Find out who the sheet is of athletes committed to coming. Start promoting those athletes right away. It's the only way you can help grow the sport is if people know who's going to be there and people can look forward to it.
Yeah, Alex, you're right. You got to get involved. If you're going to sit on the sidelines and bitch, it's not working. Like when I got out of college, I immediately got involved in USATF and my association level, national level. I became an official. I am an official. I officiate meets. I do everything. I'm a coach. It's like if you really want to make it better, put your money where your mouth is. Show up and go make it better. It's easy to post a cryptic or eye sideways tweet or Instagram post like blah, 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 blah. It's like, dude, are you actually in the trenches? Because if you're not in the arena, sit down and shut up.
It's kind of the goal of this podcast is to raise the awareness more. So I feel like I'm doing my little bit of part. I could probably be more active in the road running scene and stuff, but that's kind of the goal for me and Hyatt was to kind of raise the awareness of the sport that we love by having people like you and such on and kind of highlighting more athletes. So if you have any athletes that want to come on that we'd love to have anybody on because I don't think track athletes get enough credit for the hard work that they do. And I feel like more of them need to be interviewed and talked about. So let's jump back into coaching philosophy, though, because I like that aside. That was a perfect aside, though. So let's talk about you've coached, like you said, you've coached anywhere from young athletes in the middle school level up to the, elites, the seniors that are running in Penn Relay, setting records in the senior races, right? What is your challenge in keeping an athlete from overworking? Because a lot of the times if people are working with you to win, they want to work and they want to go hard. But I found that as a coach, sometimes it's you almost understanding the limits of the athletes a little better than they do because you're watching them. You're seeing their body language change. You're seeing their form start to break a little bit earlier in practice on a workout it shouldn't be happening in. What is your challenge there, and how do you kind of get that across to athletes? Say, like, hey, we have to tone it down a little. There's a method to my madness. Trust me here. Like, how do you go about that?
Well, when you're playing the game to win, what ends up happening is most people have a really warped view about what it is they're really doing when they're training, right? The truth is, initially, when you start training or when you're training to play the game to win, the first order of business is to really play the game to stop losing. But, and it kind of hurts people's head understanding this. There's an excellent old book called The Extraordinary Tennis for the Ordinary Player. It was written by a physicist that had a love for tennis. And what he noticed was, as a scientific point of view, he's like, all amateur players suck in the same way. because they're trying to emulate the top tier players who are so good that they can actually get a serve and put the spin on it and like fake out their opponent. That's not the amateur player. The amateur player needs to stop making double defaults. They need to stop hitting the ball in the net. They need to stop playing and they need to stop losing. And so what's happening is, we have this view of winning and we think it's just about doing hard work, no guts, no glory, this and that. So you really have to recalibrate expectations and reality. And until someone has the humility to come to terms with the only path to winning is to first stop losing, that is number one. Otherwise, it's going to be like a Sisyphus situation, right? You're forever pushing this boulder up a hill only to have it roll back down and having little or no traction made. And so when we talk about hard work, what ended up happening in the distance world, it's very interesting. We have this very mechanical view of training as a only cardiorespiratory purpose. And we know now with mitochondria development and all this stuff, that is one avenue actually to develop mitochondria biogenesis, efficacy, and density. There's other enzyme signalings that can be achieved through what we call essentially high intensity interval training, HIIT training.
Yep.
It all comes down to, is the heart pumping really hard for a period of time? Mm-hmm. So you can do it for short periods of time and move a lot of gallons of blood through a very short period of time with HIIT training, or you can do it at a kind of moderate-ish level for sustained longer periods of times and get the same benefit. The beauty of Mother Nature is it's our job to understand her and not to take this like, that what we typically do, which is a viewer's worldview of the situation, like we did with like the sun. We go, oh, we're here on Earth, so the sun must revolve around us. Or we open the body and look at this cadaver that is, that is dissected. Yeah. And we say, oh, here's a hamstring, here's a glute, here's this. And it's like, no. It's all to the brain and the body. It's one unitary whole. There's no division, dude.
Yep.
But until we can adopt that posture, you're going to have these people who are going to be very metric oriented, who are going to be like, I need to work hard, the most miles, the most hard stuff, the most more is better mentality. And it's like, we need to just talk about your mechanics. You want to go run 100 miles a week? We need to talk about how you're breathing and how you're moving. Because if you're saying like you need to increase your oxygen uptake or VO2 max or what have you, and you don't know how to breathe correctly, and you have like an overly kyphotic posture where you are hunched over and you don't get that broad shoulders, which is why we run so well, is with these broad, long shoulders. Like, yeah, you're going to have troubles.
Yeah. And, I always found the battle is like when our individuals get tired, especially distance runners, it's like, okay, it's easy to have good form early, but when you're on that, you're running a hard long run. You're going in for an 8-10 mile run. It's going to be pretty high up tempo. What are your last 3 miles? Are you now bringing your arms high across your body? Are your shoulders tense? Are you leaning forward at that point? It's like, okay, you did the mileage, but did you do it well? What did you get out of that finishing? What did you get out of that last part of your miles? And one thing I always used to like tell any difficult athletes is I used to like to look at them and go, so you're the athlete, right? Yeah. Do you know everything about this sport? No. Who am I? You're the coach. Okay. Do I know a little more than you? Yeah, I think so. Okay, then why don't you try listening to me? Like, it's one of those, and it's like kind of the aha moment of, okay, maybe they have a point. So yeah, I completely agree with that it's kind of like, if you can get them to buy into the fact that everything else outside of what they think is important is actually important, right? Because I know you're big on outside of just the running aspect.
Oh, yeah.
You're big on sleep, what you eat, what you do during the day. When you're not running, what are you doing? Are you going out and playing basketball? Okay, now then you're affecting your future workouts. Like, you're doing something different. You should be incorporating what you're doing into your training in some sort of way. So I know you're very big on that. So kind of, you like to touch on that stuff, kind of speak a little more to kind of the outside influences and how that can affect training as well.
Yeah, I mean, really astute observation, Alex. Like, I, paraphrase it very succinctly as, make the miles count, don't count the miles. And that's often what people do, because counting is easy. And you say, oh, hey, good job, little monkey. I got these many miles in a day. I must be getting better because it was hard. I worked out.
Yeah.
But in Russian literature, in Soviet literature, they have a saying. It's like there's no such thing as workout. The concept workout of being sweaty, hot, and tired doesn't exist. Every training session is actually a lesson. It's a teaching situation, a learning situation. It's a sensei and pupil situation. So, when someone comes to me with aspirations of greatness or wanting to play the game to win, first and foremost is a conversation about, all right, what is your sleep and eating habits? And are those in harmony with where you want to end up here in 6 months, 6 years, however long we're going to work together? And most people are shocked because they just want to talk about programming. They just want to talk about like, well, how many miles out a week? What do the workouts look like, coach? What are the long runs, these things? Because we hear about all these ingredients, but the fundamental foundation of training, of exercise in the human body actually is nutrient delivery and waste removal.
Yep.
So if you don't have preloaded high nutrient load in your bloodstream before you work out, and then you don't have the efficacy and the capacity to then create very rapidly that waste removal because you're overly sympathetic and now your system's on overdrive and it won't shut off. So you can't absorb nutrients. You can't let go of nutrients. You're too stiff and rigid and tight and tense. And you have this excessive oscillation effect in the muscles because they're not relaxing when they should. We can talk about how many miles you aspire to run a week, but you're essentially driving a car down the road with 2 deflated tires, the suspension's all jacked up, and the steering wheel is always cutting sharp to the right, plus 2 windows are broken. And you won't talk about you want to drive this car cross country. It's like, come on, man.
So have you ever found yourself meeting with the new athlete, sitting across from them, kind of going over your whole entire pre-observation, I guess, of the athlete, kind of trying to jive with them? And have you ever found that your philosophy just does not fit with what that athlete wants to do and that athlete's philosophy? And have you ever kind of turned an athlete down in a sense if they're not going to conform? Like, have you come to that where an elite athlete just refuses to conform and doesn't believe in what you're doing, or that they don't believe in it? Have you come to that point where you're like, hey, I don't think this is going to work out and I don't want to waste either of our time? Like, have you been in that situation?
Oh, shit. Yeah, dude. I mean, I've stopped coaching elite national caliber men and women who you would think like any coach would just be like, oh, it's a godsend. I'm working with them. They're going to make me look so good. Because I realized we just got to an impasse where it's like, I understood the direction for their development was left and they thought the direction for their development was right. And it's like, at the end of the day, like, for better or worse, the person, like when you're dealing with adults, the athlete is always right. And when you're dealing with children, the parents are always right. Like you can't sever that, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of influencing that needs to go on as a coach. But yeah, I mean, often nowadays, right, when I get a prospective new client, I actually try to talk them out of it a lot because I really don't want to work with someone if the commitment level is not there. And a lot of people like the idea of training or like might want to be coached for me for whatever reason. But like, I'm like, dude, if you're not in for at least a 3 month minimum and really a 6 month minimum, we can't even get started. We're just getting started in the first half of the year, right? Yeah. That's the reality of the situation. It's a little easier at this classic level, right? Because like kids aren't going anywhere in school, so they might as well. But when working with adult clients, elite or even like non-elite, right? Just, general gen pop athletes, I found myself, turning down more people or them turning me down because I communicated the gravity of what it was really going to take to get to what they wanted to go. When what they wanted to hear was just, I have magic workouts. And if you do my magic workouts, you're going to get better. Trust me. When it's unfortunately not that simple. We wish it was, but it's another fairy tale or a running half truth that is like, promoted to this day by essentially charlatans, right?
Yeah. There is no, and that's the thing too. Like you could put your best effort in and you could put them in the best direction possible and they can give their best honest effort. But sometimes things just don't jive. And that's especially in, running an individualistic sports, because there are certain styles and there are certain things that just don't happen, or it doesn't happen at the level that people want it to. And it's almost, there's times where it's nobody's fault. And, you're both giving it your best. You both put your best feet forward and, no pun intended there, but that's quite literally what happens. And it's unfortunate, but I mean, I'd hope that some of the athletes are amicable enough to see that when that's, obviously you've coached a lot of athletes, so you've probably fallen into that situation. How often are athletes kind of frustrated or annoyed with you or give the blame on you as a coach? And if you're a coach in this situation and you did everything you could and the athlete did everything they could and it happens that way, what's kind of your advice to some other coaches that maybe are pretty new at this or falling into this situation for the first time where you both gave the best effort, athlete and coach, and it just didn't work out? Now the athlete's kind of pissed in your direction. How do you handle that?
Oh, I sit down, I go, just go, man. All right, man, today's a shit on Coach Marcus day. Just shit on me, man. I go up front. I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to get defensive. I'm going to just listen. No rebuttals, no nothing. I want you just to, you have an open forum. Shit on me. Everything and anything that you ain't feeling, that you're not liking, because I need to hear it from the horse's mouth, direct. And I'm not going to hold it against you. It's not going to change my, opinion of you, and like, after that, the goal is to see, okay, can we come to, an amicable and, adult understanding and continue the professional working relationship? Or is it just to a point where it's like sometimes people just get fed up and they don't want to look in the mirror. So they look towards the next closest thing, which has to be the coach, place the blame there, and then just say, okay, I need to move on to a new chapter, right? And that's part of the process too, right? I mean, you're dealing with people and people are really complex, but as long as you as an individual and professional are showing up with the best intent every day, like, I hear this all the time, like athletes will like blame coaches for being lazy or not caring. I go, look, that's only true if that coach never got excited about a PR. If that coach never got excited for you about a breakthrough race, if that coach never like called your name or, gave you time of their attention, then yes, they sucked as a coach. But if that doesn't happen, like they did give a shit, they cared, and because that's how we show that in the coaching athlete community and relationship, is getting excitement for these milestones that might happen. Right.
Yeah.
And it's even recalibrating other athletes to see that. And part of it, when you're in a position of service, which essentially is the coaching role, because you are guiding someone else on their journey. So you are like Gandalf, you're leading the way for them, but they don't have to take that path. They might want to go under, in the mines and face the deep dark rather than go around the mountain like you told them. And you have to deal with it, right? So that humility and that service mindset is key when you're coaching. So you have to check your ego at the door a lot of times, and you have to be able to hear the hard things you don't want to hear, and then not get upset or offended by them as well.
So I have to ask you this, because I'd be remiss that if I have an elite coach in front of me who coached elite athletes, to not kind of ask about the Alberto Salazar situation. Now, that guy was a part of your fraternity for a long time as a coach, because coaches are a fraternity. A lot of coaches are very close, even though we're competitive in terms of athletes and stuff with each other. We are still close. We like to see each other succeed. Obviously, we want our athletes to succeed, but when one coach in the running community is succeeding, it kind of feels good for everyone. We're doing something right. And there's bits and pieces we could take from each other. When that whole situation came down, you don't have to opine too much, because I don't know how much you want to go into it, but kind of what were your emotions, and kind of did you kind of know something already being in the community? Like, what kind of the firestorm with the Alberto Salazar situation?
I mean, Alberto's a mentor of mine, for better or worse, right? And like, you have to count all your mentors equally, no matter how history ends up judging them, right? Mm-hmm. And the judgment was definitely fair, 100%. The thing is it's always tough. People are multifactorial, multidimensional, and I've seen a very good side of Alberto, and I've also seen a very vicious side. What ended up being his personal downfall was a overwhelming desire to win and have certainty surrounding winning. So, winning at all costs, as we call it, where you need to create certainty that victory will play out in your favor. Unfortunately, that's not life and that's not sport. You do all this preparation and training, and there is always going to be an air of luck to it, right?
Yeah.
And so that insecurity, that corroded and eroded his his mind essentially and his demeanor, plus with unchecked resources and power, being essentially, as for all intents and purposes, the number 2 person at Nike, and having the Nike piggy bank at his disposal, and beck and call. That also power does corrupt. It really does, because when you have access to that type of resources, the thing is you get a warped view, because not many people do. So you're not grounded anymore, right? So I always try to stay grounded myself. I mean, I learned a ton from him that was positive, and I also learned a ton that was negative, but I reframed as positive, because it's like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, right? So yeah, again, it's good and it's valid, what the judgment was and what came down, because it was a long time coming, to be frank. A lot of people were like, why is this taking so long? But I'm glad they had an airtight and shut case on it, so everyone could move forward. But like I said, a lot of people in the sport in some ways owe him a debt of gratitude, as well as also casting him out and shunning him for all the very nasty things he did as well. So it's a tough thing, because there's a lot going on there. But like I said, it's it's all, at the end of the day, it's just disappointing, because you would have hoped he could have used his position and the vehicles he had at his disposal for good, rather than for the corroded and corrupt ill he chose.
And I think your view is important, because, there's very rare, just with anything in our planet right now, that we have nuance, right? Nuance is not something that we find very often in any arena at all, especially in American conversations and narratives. So we don't have that. So for you to have that type of nuance, I think is fantastic, because I agree with you in a way that, yes, it's real easy, and no one wants to have the conversation that Alberto Salazar is one of the best American runners in distance of all time. He's a very good runner. Again, a lot of people will say he wasn't very liked then, but he was competing. I don't think he really cared if he was liked. He was trying to win at all costs, even then, which is unfortunate. And I think he brought that into his coaching. And I think the major disappointment, like you said, you learned a lot from him. And I think the major disappointment is he was a talented individual. He was a wealth of knowledge. He obviously had some coaching acumen, because you can't just go and do the things he did without properly training some individuals. You can give individuals any type of, drug, any type of whatever you want to give them. If there isn't some ability, if there isn't something to the training, then they're not going to become world champions. They're not going to compete at a high world level like that. So I think it's an unfortunate thing. It's obviously, again, it's fair criticism, in a weird way. I hate saying this, but he almost got what he deserved in a sense. But at the same time, it's tragic, because there's a guy that really could have been an amazing American influence for American distance running. And now he's one of the biggest villains on the planet in terms of running. So it is really unfortunate. I appreciate your nuance, though.
Yeah, to be frank, he's the person who showed me the import of having runners do strength and conditioning work, being very cognizant of sleep and nutrition. In a lot of ways, he was a really foundational and positive influence on expanding my worldview of running and coaching beyond just the scope of how many miles you're running and how fast is the pace, which is very, very common and very, very much the boundaries of most people's worldview of training and coaching, distance runners and middle distance runners. So I owe him a debt of gratitude in that regard. But at the same time, too, like I said, I saw firsthand him say and do some nasty things to athletes he was working with. And, it just created, like I said, a very mixed taste in the mouth.
So one thing I do have to ask you before we jump on here, because we were talking about training athletes. We were kind of talking about training athletes as like athlete A, athlete B. But, you coach both men and women, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So there is a difference between coaching men and women in terms of these types of sports. When you're approaching men and women, what is a different way that you approach their training and their aspect, and in terms of how you go about training them? Because the proof that there is a difference is kind of the times that we see a lot of the men and women run, right? You can do similar things, but obviously there's some things you have to change biologically with the, men's gait versus women's gait, stride running, things like that. So what is your approach in terms of when you're dealing with the man versus a woman and how you go about training each of them?
A lot of it is understanding, again, contextualizing in the worldview of where they're coming from and at what age they're coming from, right? So, like, a woman essentially in America has, I think it's something absurd, about 3,000 to 5,000 indirect messages broadcasted to them every day that they're insufficient in some way. Typically, the American male, if he's white, does not have that. If he's a male of color, there's a different broadcasting and interpretation and stress that comes with that in America. So, first and foremost, you have to create a safe space for those people and those athletes. And then you also have to, understand, like, yeah, we can't have, necessarily like complete, total, flat equality across the board, but we can be equitable with what we're doing and give the right amount of something to this person or that person or this or that. And the tough part is, people, especially younger people, when we're working with younger athletes, as I'm sure you know, their biggest currency is attention. So that they track the amount of time you're spending, especially the more intelligent, enlightened, and evolved women. They will keep a running tab on, like, okay, you spent 5 minutes with Susie, 10 minutes with Shelby, 8 minutes with Anna, 9 minutes with me, and then interpret that as a hierarchy of, who your quote unquote favorite is, right? And I've had that many times where we're in the collegiate level. I'd be accused by a female athlete of, like, oh, you play favorites. I go, what? No way. And then they would give me their interpretation of how they came to that conclusion. I go, I could see how, and I'd validate her interpretation. I could see how you could, come to that conclusion with that outlook. But the reality is this is not the case. I'm here to tell you that straight up. But, it's hard because at the end of the day, we're coaching people, and people are social creatures, because the hard wiring of this all is about neurochemicals, right? Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all these hormones and chemicals, these positive ones that we want released. So in order to get that is really a driver is, before we even talk about the X's and O's of training, of, yeah, women need to do a little bit more strength and conditioning work because they lack, relative to men, gross muscle tissue power. But also, too, women need to do a little bit more, like, longer aerobic work, because they generally have more fat on their frame that they can utilize to their advantage as a clean fuel source. But then accessing that pathway, that chemical pathway, needs to be a little bit more trained, because it's not the most, fluent one that's readily available to us. And then men, yeah, they need to do a little bit more power and explosive work, even if they're distance runners, because of the mTOR enzyme signaling and positive, anabolic hormone release that they're going to get of testosterone from doing that stuff. That's going to help them recover quicker, make them feel better, this and that, right? So again, it's understanding all those, what I call local and global realities, right? The global realities of what globally, men and women need and the biological differences, but also locally within who you're coaching, the context you're coaching, and the people you're trying to interact with. It's kind of, again, you have to hold multiple things in your head at once to be able to, like, deliver the best service to that athlete possible.
Man, I have gotten such an education just by talking to you today, Jonathan. This has been I came into this, I saw a lot of what you did, and I thought this was going to be a great and educational podcast, but it's gone above and beyond. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, Alex, dude, thank you, man. Thanks for asking really, really, really astute questions. I appreciate it.
I do what I can. So again, he's Jonathan J. Marcus, obviously a fantastic coach and co-host of the On Coaching podcast. Give us, where can people find the On Coaching podcast? Anything else that you would like to promote before we jump on out of here?
Yeah, I mean, you can find the On Coaching podcast on, Spotify, Apple, iPod, whatever. Science of Running, Steve Magnus's thing. Best way to get it is just sign up for the email, and we'll drop an email every time I release it. And then two, the thing that's Magnus and I have built is what we call the Running Scholar Program, which is essentially a cohort of, running nerds who are just looking at, like we talked about today, all the nuances that go into training and distance running, the history. We have what we call a clubhouse, which is essentially like an online chat room with multiple channels, not really a forum. Think of it more like an AIM, or it's actually like a Discord server. People are familiar with that. But like, there's always a wealth of information going on there. Coaches asking, like, hey, I'm coaching middle schoolers for the first time. What do I do? Or I have this issue with the high school and IT band. And then all of a sudden you get like 5 or 10 different coaches. I mean, we're talking some of the best coaches in the US and also internationally at various junior and national and senior levels, as well as brand new coaches all intersecting. So it's a pretty cool digital hangout. Like, I can't tell you, Alex, like how cool it is to live in an era where we can use these toys and these tools and technology to like communicate, converse, and interact like this versus just, waiting until we all got to a track meet and hopefully running to each other at a coffee shop or a bar. So, I mean, it's a great time to be alive. So I encourage people to look into the Running Scholar program and sign up for it. Steve and I charge about $1 a day for it, which is pennies on the dollar. Because the more important thing is, rather than making a buck, is making sure the message and community grows stronger and spreads.
That's awesome. And yeah, so basically what you described with that kind of forum is a much less toxic version of the Let's Run.
I try to say it's not at all. I mean, it maybe would have been Let's Run. Like they were gold in the early 2000s. Like they were total gold back then. But yeah, now it's just, yeah.
We had Jonathan Galt on a few weeks ago who, I love his writing. I think he's one of the more underrated sports writers in general. I love Jonathan.
Yeah, he hustles, man. I appreciate his hustle. Yeah.
He's fantastic. And yeah, but everyone knows the Let's Run forum is kind of don't let the Let's Run forum speak for the Let's Run website. That's a nice way to put it there, because the website still is a good wealth of knowledge for running. But again, thank you so much for coming on, Jonathan. This was fantastic. If you're a coach, I hope you got a lot out of this, because you can learn a lot from listening to people like Jonathan. If you're an athlete, if you're an elite athlete, get in touch with Jonathan. If you want to be pushed and you want to be great and you want to achieve your maximum potential, he's the guy to do it. So again, this is the Talking in Ovals podcast. I really appreciate everyone listening. Everyone, so long.